ladies and gentlemen, to what will hopefully be the first of many videos I'm going to be putting together. My name is Damascus, and this is going to be my Death Knight Frost Dual Wield Talent Tree Spec tutorial. Now, before we get into the talent tree itself, I just want to clarify a couple of things. Now, if you look at multiple forums, it's going to tell you that Two-Handed Unholy is definitely the #1 DPS spec for DKs. Though I don't argue with that, what I do argue with is the fact that individual playstyles vary, which are going to determine which spec is best for you. In my case, I've been playing Death Knight since they first came out in Wrath of the Lich King. And even though I was unholy at the time, ever since the new CAD patch, just my personal playstyle has made me a far more superior dual-wielding Frost DK than two-handed Unholy. Again, it's all about individual playstyle. This might work for you, it might not work for you. You just gotta feel it out and see what kind of player you are. Now let's get down to business. Unlike a lot of the other videos that you guys may have seen, I'm not just going to tell you what to spec into. I'm going to tell you why you should spec into it and why you shouldn't spec into the rest of the tree. We're going to start off with Nerves of Cold Steel, which is absolutely essential if you're going to be dual wielding. The reason for that is that the melee hit cap is at 26%, which with the current level of gear in the game is completely impossible. So the idea is to try to get as close to that as humanly possible. Nerves of Cold Steel is going to give you an automatic 3% increase to your hit, which is going to be a huge advantage. You'll notice as you switch from tree to tree that your hit is naturally going to be higher in your Frost spec as long as you have Nerves of Cold Steel. In addition to that, the 25% additional damage you're doing with your offhand weapons is essential, seeing as your offhand weapon is going to be responsible for approximately 33% of your damage. Next, we're going to be going over what's essentially a preference choice. You've got Runic Power Mastery, you've got Icy Reach. Now, most people are definitely going to go towards Icy Reach because it's going to increase the range of one of your most powerful attacks as a Frost DK. That's your Howling Blast. But there's a couple reasons that you're going to want to stay away from this. Number one, it's not going to help you at all in a raid. Single target Icy Reach really isn't going to help you out that much. It is a nice ability to have if you want to PvP though. But again, since we're focusing on raid DPS, it's really not essential. In addition to that, you'll find that you'll pull off the tanks a lot by using your Howling Blast. Increasing its range is only going to make it worse. In most cases where you have a weak tank that can't keep aggro, I would suggest using Icy Touch. Next, we're going to go into the 3 points into Runic Power Mastery and the reason that I chose it. Now, most people would argue with you that any good DK is never going to let their Runic Power max out because that's just going to be a waste of attacks down the road through the fight. Well, in the case of Runic Power Mastery, you won't have that problem. If you do mess up, or if your rotation calls for popping out an extra obliterator and you end up maxing out, oh well, you've got some room to spare and you won't have any runic power that's wasted. Next, we're going to go into Tier 2 of your Frost tree. Now, the two talents that I've chosen are Annihilation and Endless Winter. Annihilation is a no-brainer. Obliterates your most powerful DPS attack. Increasing its attack power is an absolute no-brainer. Then we have Endless Winter. Though it doesn't give us any direct benefit to our DPS, there is a great deal of fights both in heroics and in raids now that require interrupts. With Mind Freeze, you'll no longer have to waste runic power. So, in hindsight, it actually will increase your DPS by allowing you to save all your runic power for your Frost Strikes. Now, the two abilities that I haven't chosen, Lichhorn and On a Pale Horse, are purely PvP-based abilities. Again, Frost is a great and viable tree if you decide to do PvP. I myself have a PvP spec where I utilize Frost, but for the purpose of DPS raiding, both of these abilities are pretty much useless. There's yet to be a raid boss where you're going to have to get on your mount. In addition to that, Your raid awareness and your healer should be what's keeping you alive, and not your Lichborn. Now we're going to go into the third tier of the tree, and these you're going to want to take every one of these and max them out as much as possible. Chill of the Grave is going to make it so that your change of Ice, Halsey Blast, and Icy Touch and Obliterate generate additional runic power. Runic power equals more Frost Strikes. Next we've got Killing Machine, which is also another easy one. Every one of your melee attacks is going to give you a chance to make your next Icy Touch, Obliterate, or Frost Strike a critical strike. With that said, don't ever waste your Killing Machine on an Icy Touch. And last we have Merciless Combat. Now, it's going to do an additional 12 damage when you strike targets that are less than 35% health. So it's definitely great for those types of raids end up being DPS races, such as Buried in Hold. The fourth tree pretty much is the same. You're going to max out every one of these abilities, and again, they're pretty self-explanatory. Rhyme gives your Obliterate a 45% chance to cause you to get a free Howling Blast that isn't going to consume any of your runes. Now, you're going to be using Howling Blast for all of your single target damage, and I'm going to go into that right now. It's really an issue of simple math. Your Howling Blast base damage is going to do 5.4k. Well, your Icy Touch is going to only do 2.6k on its own, so it's a no-brainer. The only advantage the Icy Touch has over Howling Blast is the fact that it will inflict Frost Fear on your opponents, but we already have a way of fixing that. You have to ensure that you get your glyph of the Howling Blast, which will give it the ability to cast Frost Fever on your opponents. So in addition, you'll create a superior attack that completely makes Icy Touch useless, or with the exception of when you're not trying to pull off your tank. The other glyph you're going to need is Glyph of Frost Strike, which is going to reduce the cost of your Frost Strike by 8 runic power. In addition to that, you've got your Glyph of Obliterate, which we've already stated before is going to be your #1 DPS dealer. So the additional 20% damage to it is going to be a nice addition. The rest of your glyphs are pretty much up to you, but the only one that I would have to suggest is essential to DPS would have to be your Glyph of Blood Tap. If you find yourself without anything to strike because you've got little to no runic power, or you have no runes whatsoever, just use your Blood Tap and that should take care of that issue. Now let's get back to the talent tree. Next we're going to be looking at Pillar of Frost, which is just amazing. It's going to give you an increased strength buff of 20% for 20 seconds, so anyone that doesn't get this is quite frankly high. Now another great thing you can do with your Pillar of Frost is to macro it to your raised dead. Why is that? Because your ghoul's going to take a snapshot of whatever your stats are at when it's summoned. If you pop Pillar of Frost first, your ghoul's going to have that 20% buff on it for the duration of its existence, thus increasing your DPS anywhere between 1 to 1.5k. Now, on a long raid fight, you might be able to pop your ghoul out 3 or even 4 times, so it'll make a difference in the long run. Next, we're going to have our improved Icy Talons, which is great because #1, it's going to give your entire raid a haste buff, in addition to increasing the haste buff that you are already receiving from your Icy Talons. Now, also keep in mind that the faster that you're striking, the more likely that your Killing Machine is going to proc. So again, improved Icy Talons is a must if you want to be a superior dual-wielding Frost DK. And last on this tree is going to be Brittle Bones, which is also no brainer. It increases the damage that your opponent takes by 4%. Next we're going to go into the 5th tier of our Frost tree. Hunger and Cold really doesn't do anything for your DPS whatsoever. It's nice to have, but it's utterly useless unless you got some PvP. The only reason we even spec into it at all is because Howling Blast is essential for numerous reasons that I've mentioned before. Next, we're definitely going to want to put our points into improved Frost Presence, because it's going to increase the amount of runic power that you generate while in your Frost Presence by 5%. Which, again, more runic power equals more Frost Strikes. And remember, Frost Strikes are your #2 DPS damage dealer. Now we're going to go into why we didn't get Chili Blades. Again, this is a great PvP skill and may even have some use in raids, but ultimately you're going to be taking points away from much needed points, DPS building points that you can use in your Unholy and Blood tree, which we're going to get into once I'm done with the next stat. Last but not least, Threat of the Thracian. This pretty much makes it so that every time that you cast an attack with your main hand, you're going to cast the identical attack with your offhand weapon, i.e. obliterate with your main, followed by an obliterate with your offhand weapon, and so on and so forth. This is so important that, just letting you know, I messed up once and wasn't paying attention. I only put 2 points in here. The difference in DPS is up to 3k. So maxing this ability out is essential to maximizing your DPS. Now we're going to go into the few points that you have left over and what you're going to do with them now that you're done with your Frost tree. What's absolutely essential is your bladed armor, because essentially it's going to give you a new stat to take a look at whenever you're picking up gear. Armor isn't going to be simply defensive anymore, it's going to add to your attack power. So any DK that wants to do any kind of damage should definitely be getting bladed armor. The next no-brainer is going to be Epidemic. Now, the longer that your diseases are on target, the less that you'll have to Plague Strike in order to get that Blood Plague back on your opponent. Remember, your Obliterate's doing additional damage for every disease you have on it, so you're going to want your Blood Plague and your Frost Fever up at all times. But you don't have to worry about Frost Fever, because your Howling Blast is going to proc often, so you might as well just pop it off with that free rune. And then last but not least is going to be Virulence. Virulence is going to increase your spell hit cap to about 9%. Now, as I've stated before, 26% melee hit cap is virtually impossible to get with our current level of gear, which is why it's essential that you get this, so that at least your non-melee attacks are going to hit 100% of the time. The one you'll be using the most is, of course, Howling Blast. Great thing about gearing, though, is eventually Virulence is going to be useless. You're going to have to wait until you're a little more geared, but ultimately Virulence will become useless, seeing as the spell hit cap is much lower than the melee hit cap. Once you're melee hit capped, you'll automatically be spell hit capped in itself, and you'll honestly be spell hit capped long before you hit that melee hit cap. So once that happens, feel free to take these 3 points out of Virulence and then put them in whatever you'd like. When and if that day comes, you should stay clear of the other Unholy and Blood talents. You should probably go back to Frost. My advice at that point would be to put 2 points into Chillblains. Again, it's more of a PvP talent, but it'll come in handy in raids with an interesting mechanic, such as the first boss in BWD, which spawns parasites that need to be slowed. You having this and using your Howling Blast will make you far more valuable in AoE damage and your ability to prevent the parasites from wiping the raid. And then with your 1 point that remains, I'd definitely put it on Lichborn. Again, you shouldn't be counting on your death coils in order to heal yourself, but if you find yourself in a bad spot, you might want to do it. And although raid bosses rarely ever have charm or sleep effects, there are a few that have fearing effects, so Lichborn might be able to get you back into the fight. Thanks for dropping by, guys. This pretty much concludes my introduction to the Death Knight Dual Wield Frost talent tree. Feel free to leave comments, let me know what you think, and maybe pass along some advice. Till next time.